So I've always wanted to build a raised bed garden, and I'm going to want to do one that comes up about that height because I don't have the best back in the world, and I have no desire to get down on the ground and crawl around and tend to a garden. So the idea is I'm going to take pallets, like those pallets over there, and use them to build a structure that I can get some dirt on. And one of the first things I want to do here is put down some pavers. In fact, all the wood used in this entire structure is basically going to have these pavers underneath it so that the wood does not contact the ground and thereby rot. Now, what I like about pallets is obviously they're very strong, especially when you set them up on edge like this. And then they of course they're cheap if you can find them. Now, honestly, there's pretty big demand on pallets, so they're not as easy to find as you might think, at least where I live. But I did manage to come up with enough to do this. It took me a little while. But the other thing about pallets is they are made of wood, which of course means you can attach stuff to them. And I have this notion of putting a sprinkler system over the top, and also a structure that I can cover the garden with, which would be good in various situations, as you can imagine. Early spring, late fall. If you cover your garden, that'll probably extend your growing season by a couple weeks on either end of that. Keeping things from freezing. And then also you get things like hail and stuff that other destructive forces, including birds and insects and et cetera, et cetera. What we're going to do here is I'm going to tie these one end of the pallets to the fence, and not because I'm using the fence as any part of the structure. It's just going to hold the pallets in place for me since I'm doing this by myself. And you'll notice on this particular day we have quite a bit of wind blowing, trying to move my pallets around for me, but again, because I've tied them to the fence, they don't blow over. Now, the initial thing I'm trying to accomplish here is I want to basically just attach them all together with some planks. I was fortunate enough to find some pallets that had some very long planks on them. Some of them were like 8 feet long. These weren't that long, but you notice I have to cut them to get them to the right size and just progress all the way down to the end. So I have them all attached on that end. And then I wised up and put the pallet up on top of the table there to take it apart. Now, I will tell you I spent a lot of time taking pallets apart, and there's probably a lot easier ways to do it than I show you. I do show you, I have another video that shows you I call it something like raised bed pallet garden skills, and it just shows you some of the other little things you have to be able to do. Like, for example, I chose to use screws to assemble this thing just because I happen to have a lot of them around, deck screws and such. And when you use screws, you tend to be way smarter if you drill pilot holes. So anyway, we've got the pallets all hooked together. So now I'm going to need to add some, I'm just calling them extensions, and I think it'll make more sense as you see what I'm doing here. But what I'm going to do is kind of show you two cameras. I have 2 cameras filming this whole proposition during this particular process, because you have to do this 5 different times the way this particular design goes. So as you can see, you have 2 different shots there. The GoPro time lapse is the smaller of the 2. And then my regular video, I've sped it up by a factor of, 5 or 6, I don't know. But I'm just trying to give you an idea of how it is I'm connecting all this stuff together, because that's sort of the key to this entire structure is, and really it's the key to any structure is how does it attach to itself, because that's how it gets all its strength. And even though these particular planks are just little dinky one by things that are not particularly strong, it gets its strength from the fact that it's hooked to everything else. So what I'm trying to show you is both the time-lapse video, the small screen, and really the regular video. And between the two of them, you should be able to figure out how I'm adding this little extension shelf on, if you will. Now, unfortunately, they're not synced together exactly, but I think you can see, if you look at it closely, you can see that they're pretty close to doing the same thing at the same time. Now, one of the things I want to point out about this entire project is it's sort of a design as you go, use what you have project, which turns out to be a lot of fun. I think my woodworker type people out there will really appreciate the fact that you just have, in effect, you have this pile of stuff, and you're going to make something out of that pile of stuff. And instead of sitting down and drawing out exactly how it's going to look in the end, what we do is we basically just kind of put it together as we go. And it turns out I had a lot of fun doing this just because of that. But it also turns out there were some things that are a little, I would definitely do different. So anyway, here you are. You notice I put 5 of those extensions on. I'm working on the 5th one right now. And you use the same process for every one of them, at least I did. Because I had those large pallets with the long planks, then it worked out to basically put this thing together this particular way. And as I finish this thing up, I basically just walk in and out of those little extensions to show you I can access everything. So what we now have is a basic structure. And from this basic structure, we can basically come up with a way to put some dirt up here on top. Now, I'm going to use tin for that, and I'll explain that as we go. But the trouble is, dirt is pretty heavy. Now, you'll notice I can access everything from these little extensions. I can basically reach out and get to any point in this raised bed garden, which of course was the whole object behind doing it from my standpoint. But what I think is going to happen, the pallets are plenty strong. They'll support the weight no problem, but I'm going to have to add some other vertical members here at these junctions of the basic cross members in order to distribute the weight of the dirt all the way down to the ground. So you see that paver down there. I'm basically, by the way, you notice that we have these little pavers underneath all the pallets and stuff, and that's to get the wood up off the ground so it doesn't rot. But I'm also going to put pavers down there where all of these vertical support members are going to go. And it's a thing we're doing for strength reasons, because dirt is heavy and wet dirt is heavier. So basically I'm going to have to do some things in order to make sure that we can get the weight distributed down to the ground. Otherwise things will sag and bow and possibly even break. Now I'm going to bend tin kind of up what amounts to against the fence, although we're going to move that everything out away from the fence a little bit. But I'm going to bend this line of tin will bend here, and then as I come over here to these extensions will just bend up a U-shaped piece of tin, I guess. That's kind of my initial plan. We'll see what happens as we get through this process. But there you go. That's your basic structure. Now notice and I'm going to need to add some things onto it in order to support the tin on the sides, and again to get the weight distributed all the way down to the ground. Now again, the pavers I consider to be pretty important because we definitely do not want that wood contacting the ground. Termites tend to like wood, and if we can get it up off the ground, I think it's going to add to the life expectancy of this thing a great deal. So I've just basically scattered pavers throughout there, and I'll align them as we go. But what you can see I'm doing here is I'm cutting supports that go all the way to the ground. And in this particular case, this one also comes up above to about the level that I'm going to want the dirt to come to. And, the actual proposition of putting this thing together is not that big a deal. It's just a matter of cutting it to the right size and then screwing it on. And again, the thing that's going to make it work is the fact that everything is hooked together. But that should get the, and you see, notice I put them all the way down, and then we're going to do exactly the same thing in the middle here. And I just have some, kind of 2x pieces there that came off of pallets at various places, and cut them to the right size and screw them on. That's the whole name of the game here. So I think one of the things I want to point out here is in doing things like this, they're actually very green things to do. It's really helping your world be a little less dependent on fossil fuel by growing what you eat right at home, as opposed to having to drive to a store and pick up the various things you eat. So it's a very green thing to do. In fact, in many ways, this is actually better than a gold mine, because, quite honestly, you can't eat gold, but you can eat what comes out of this garden. And not only that, year after year after year, it theoretically will, you just keep replanting it and keep replenishing it, and it'll take care of you for a long time. And now, I'm not really a doomsday kind of guy, but I do think it's pretty smart to try to make sure that you have the ability to take care of yourself, as opposed to always being dependent on even things like stores. If you have a way of not having to do that, you're probably going to be way ahead of the game. So let me stop this right here. That one piece right there is my template, and I use it to figure out how long the pieces should be. So I can actually take my tape measure all the way down to the ground, up to the top of that template, and that's how long that piece should be, and that will put it up at the dirt level. So I use my little template there, and I'm going to do the same thing on what I call the sides. Now these do not have to go all the way to the ground. They're just going to support the sides of the tin, because the dirt will try to exert some sort of a force out on it. We need to do the same thing on each end. You've got to have something to support the sides of the tin. So as I finish up the ends, I'm just about ready to give you a tour of this whole thing. And this is our structure with supports. As you can see, we have a system whereby we can get all the weight of this thing down to the ground, which is the most important thing. Some might ask, why didn't you just put more pallets on it? And the correct answer to that would be, I had a hard enough time collecting all these pallets, so this is kind of what I just ended up with. And it wasn't really that hard to supports on it. And you would have had to tie them together anyway, one way or the other. So there's your structure. Up next, I'll show you how to get the tin and dirt in.